Hello, this is Dr. Feast Price, and I'd like for us to continue our lecture by discussing the contributions of Alfred Adler to family therapy. So we've already discussed Adler to a brief extent, and we know that Adler believes that we are a product of our relationships and our social interactions. Alfred Adler was the first psychiatrist of the modern era to do family therapy, and this began in 1919. He was among the first to incorporate mental health in school settings. Adler believed that in order to address the issues that were paramount to a child, that you must include not only the individual or child, but also the family as well as the teachers. His approach was systemic long before systems theory had ever been applied to psychotherapy. So Alfred Adler recognized that in working with children in school settings, the only way you can positively impact their behavior is by ensuring that the family was involved in the process as well as teachers. He was really on to something, because we know that any child with a problem, and even school psychologists recognizes this, if there is a problem with the child, while some attention is given to the child, much of the attention is given to the family. And because this is a school setting, teachers are also involved in the treatment process. Adler was the first therapist to use and write about family therapy. Adlerian theory suggests that an individual cannot be understood in isolation, and most problems an individual encounters or face is based upon interpersonal problems. Adler also recognized that people have little or no perception or preparation for parenting. So we get into parenting, we become parents, but we have very little or no preparation for parenting. Sometimes the only preparation we might have is what was handed down from us through the generations. So we remember how we were parented by our parents, and we use those parenting modalities for our own children. But in today's times, there are many parenting books that help us to be more effective parents. And so things have changed a lot more in terms of parents being more prepared for the role of parenting. However, during Adler's time, he recognized that people had little or no preparation for parenting, which is why there were and are some of the problems we see in today's times. As it relates to Adler, he believes that parents and children become locked into repetitive, negative interactions based on mistaken goals. And while this is specific to parents and children, the same can be said for adults in the family context, the husband and wife. They too become locked in to repetitive negative interactions based on mistaken goals. And so we talked about that negative feedback loop. Parents and children, or husbands and wives, or partners, sometimes they have that repetitive negative interaction. They want to break the interaction, but unfortunately they're oftentimes left with not knowing how to do so. Children are active agents in the family, and they are striving for growth and significance as well as meaning. Adler also espouses that children have too much influence on the family, which weakens the leadership of parenting. So this happens when parents give children too much authority, too much input, and they get to pull too many strings within the family system. Within the family atmosphere, what is unique to that family is what exists in the family atmosphere. And we talked about the fact that every family has a culture, but Adler refers to this as the family atmosphere, and this is what is unique to that particular family. There are particular ways of relating, being, and interacting within a family unit. So a person that's grounded in Adlerian therapy, as a family systems therapist, would focus on the family atmosphere, or the ways in which the family members relate to each other, how family members exist, as well as interact within the family structure. Parents, in their interaction with each other, model how to be in relationships. So if you think about your own parents, you think about how they interacted with others. And sometimes it's not just your parents, it's other models that you work with that you are exposed to. So when I work in couples therapy or family therapy, I always like to find out who were the models for the couple, for the adults in the family as they were growing up. Who taught them how to be a husband, a wife, a partner? Who taught them how to parent their children? And so that will help you to understand what are some of the messages that have been handed down through the years, and thus how it correlates to their parenting skills and abilities currently. Adler also believes that children learn how to be overprotective, nurturing, easygoing, hostile, challenging, as well as respectful or disrespectful through their interactions. I work with one pediatrician who believes that some of the ways in which children are either overprotective, nurturing, easygoing, hostile, challenging, and respectful is based upon their genetic makeup. They have a certain temperament. For my youngest daughter, I remember when she was born and the pediatrician was interacting with her, and this was maybe the same day or the next day after she was born. He said that she was high on the temperament scale. In fact, he gave her an 8. She has always been a temperamental child. And so while I do agree with Adler that it does have some bearing on how children are raised, that determines who they are and their sense of being. But I also recognize that there are genetic factors that play into whether a person is mild-mannered, easygoing, hostile, overprotective, respectful, or challenging. Adler also has coined the phrase family value, and it suggests that what's important to parents, that is connected with the family values. So when parents value certain things within that family structure, then that determines what the family values are. So whether it's issues related to religiosity or spirituality, education, money, looks, status, these are the kinds of things that are communicated through families. But we also have to recognize that our society also dictates what some of our values are. And so while family plays an essential role, society plays a role. The peers with whom our children interact, parents, their peers, it all determines the family values. So family values come to define the stand or the position that the whole family takes on particular issues. Children adapt to or challenge these views as they grow older. So some of the things children might learn within the family constellation as they get older, they might challenge those. They might not believe to the same extent that they were taught these issues once they become older and are able to understand things from a different vantage point or through their own lenses. Adler believes that birth order is also very critical. And we recognize, as we talk about birth order, that each child figures out where they fit in within the family system. And they also use this to define themselves. You know, there's a lot of literature that's written about birth order, but one of the things that the literature shows is that as it relates to birth order, sometimes the individual child decides what meaning they will they will give their particular birth order. So some middle children see themselves as the peacemaker, always striving to bring about peace. Some people might see the middle child as being the one that gets all the attention because they're right in the middle, and the oldest child is rebellious, the youngest is spoiled, so the middle child is considered the perfect child because they're always trying to get positive feedback from their parents. So it's the ways in which people make sense of their birth order. But I always think it's important as a therapist to identify birth order and to understand the meaning that each individual attributes to their birth order. Along the same lines with birth order, children's images of themselves, their self-concept, how it arises out of their interpretation of where and how they fit within the family. And so that ties into what I've already said about birth order. It's not, there's no universality associated with birth order. Sometimes it's very unique within the families. There have been researchers that try to say that any firstborns had these characteristics, middle children have these characteristics, lastborn, only children have certain characteristics. And in some instances that may be accurate, but there is some variation that exists within the literature or the research whereby persons believe that there's not enough consistency to make any absolutes. But what is important is to understand how individuals interpret their birth order and the meaning that they give to their birth order. So they're asking questions like, who is like me? Who's very different from me? Who's against me? What children have aligned themselves, and who does mom and dad like best? These are among the questions that are asked as therapists try to understand how birth order relates to a particular family. Again, who is like me or like the individuals within the family, who's very different from certain people in the family, who's against them, what children align together and have an alliance, and who does the parents like the best. Along the same lines, as we further examine birth order, it has to do with how much power and influence does each kid have over the family. And sometimes that is determined by birth order. How much power and influence does each kid have in their individual lives, whether it be their relationships with their peers, school, work, as well as unique achievements? What spots are already taken within the family, like the perfect child, the smart child, the rebellious child? And how do individuals within the family, particularly children, distinguish themselves from other children in the family? So just to keep in mind, Adler was really focused on children and how children function within the family and some of the dysfunctionalities that exist within children in the family context. And so that's why these questions are of particular importance as it relates to Alfred Adler and overcoming some of the family issues and systems problems. So the process of family therapy, as it relates to Adler, greater knowledge is obtained through genograms. And genograms includes 3 generations typically. And so you have the index person, which is usually the individual that comes in for therapy. So the index person, or the person presenting for therapy, you will ask them to generate adjectives about each person in the family. And the starting place is to uncover the subjective meaning that they give to these individuals. So usually a person comes in for therapy, and so they might identify their parents, they might indicate there's 2 other siblings in the family, and so you ask the person who is the index person to tell me their subjective meaning. So who is this person? Who is this particular person in the family? And who's this other person in the family? And who is that individual, the index person in the context of the family? And so we recognize that genograms allows families and counselors to get a sense of family patterns. Sometimes within family systems therapy or family therapy, you might use genograms to best understand substance abuse issues or any other kinds of cycles of behavior that has been handed down from one generation to another. And it's very clear to see that there are some of these generational patterns. And as a therapist, a family systems therapist or a family therapist, your primary role and function is to engage a positive feedback, the negative feedback loop, whereby you're disrupting the homeostasis and recreating more effective patterns of relating. Adler also believes that within the family systems framework that there are specific reasons why children misbehave. And again, just as a reminder, for Adler, he was very child-focused. He worked in school settings, and his role was to understand, why do children misbehave? What contributes to the maladaptive behavior that exists within children that were at a particular school setting? And he states that maladaptive behavior or patterns of misbehavior is the individual's attempt to obtain attention. So if you look at a child that's misbehaving, according to Adler, he would say that the child is misbehaving because they are vying for attention. It might also be that there's a power struggle. There's a power struggle that is going on between siblings within the family. So the maladaptive behavior occurs as a result of a power struggle. It might also have to do with revenge. So the child might be angry or upset with a particular member or members of the family, and as such, they might misbehave as a result of trying to obtain revenge. And he also believes that maladaptive behavior is a direct result of demonstrating an inadequacy. The person is incapable of functioning appropriately. So because of the inadequacies, there is the pattern of misbehavior or maladaptive behavior. Along the same lines, the process of therapy suggests that you describe exactly what the misbehavior or maladaptive behavior is. You describe the parent's reaction to this behavior, whether it's permissive, authoritarian, authoritative. You describe the children's reaction to parents' attempts to discipline. And so through these processes, you obtain relevant information about how to best meet the needs of the child. So from exploring what some of the core issues are, the problem, identifying the problem or problems, from there, the goals of therapy are to, number one, educate parents about their leadership roles in the family, to help them to recognize automatic and unconscious negative interactions, because persons are not always cognizant of what they do, why they do the things they do, and the cyclical nature of their behavior, some of the negative outcomes. And so not only do you want to educate the parent or the adults within the family about their role in the family, but you want to help them to recognize automatic unconscious negative interactions, and you want to help them to replace those negative interactions with positive, more functional kinds of ways of functioning. So along the same lines, we want to consider the family as the focus. The family in focus is what Adler relates to, or what he defines this as. And he sees this is a model that's not only educational but also collaborative in nature. And one family sits in front of an audience, and the audience is made up of parents and educators and community members. And so the audience observes the family as the focus. And so through this process of observing the family as the focus, there is a process through observing them. The observers recognize what the problems are. So they describe what the problems are. And after describing what the problems are, they identify goals for solving the problems. So Adler recognized that it's only when you could put the family on stage, on focus, by relevant participants, typically comprised of parents and educators and other community members, that you can be able to describe the problem, set goals for eradicating the problem. Consistent with what has already been described, the person may be asked to describe a typical day. What's a typical day like? And in the person describing the typical day, you're looking for nuances where there's disruption, where there's maladaptive behavior and communication, and you're recognizing what are the key goals that must be identified and addressed. The therapist would also interview the child and identify the goals that the child has for him or herself. So recognizing that within the child is the ability for them to have specific goals and identify ways in which the problem can be alleviated. So not just focusing on the adults in the family, but also giving voice to the children so they can recognize what's most effective for them. And in doing this and recognizing the family, and through this audience observing the family, you want to help them to generate new approaches to communicating, to problem solving, to behaving, to relating, to loving each other, a whole new way of being within the family structure. Also, Adler, from a family systems therapy perspective, he believes that the counselor should try to uncover mistaken goals. So rather than seeing the behavior as disruptive, they're recognizing that the goal of the behavior is for attention or love and affection. And so it's helping them to redefine what they're seeing. They look for negative interaction patterns. They look for feelings and reactions. They look for behaviors. And from this perspective, they try and uncover what are the core goals that the person is trying to achieve through this dysfunctional behavior. A lot of times the focus is on the behavior. Oh, he's always throwing a temper tantrum whenever he doesn't want something. Or he's always whining. She is always whining or always crying. Those behaviors serve a particular goal. So through the whining, the crying, or the temper tantrum, there are specific things that the child is trying to obtain. There are certain goals that they're trying to obtain. And so rather than paying attention to the outcome, which is the behavior, it's focusing on what exactly is the child trying to communicate when they behave a certain way as it relates to feelings and reactions and behaviors. So the goal is to achieve a democratic, effective, and harmonious family living environment. And also the goal is to bring about social equality, whereby every member of the family has an equal right to be respected and valued. So whether the person be the child or the adult, every person in the family has an equal right to be respected and valued. So thus far, we've talked a lot about Adler and his contributions to family therapy. My goal for this lecture was to give you a glimpse into how Adler arrived at his thinking as it relates to the family, particularly in his workings with children in school settings. And he really was on to something, particularly as it relates to providing services to children and involving parents as well as community teachers and other community stakeholders. Even today, school psychologists or school counselors, they still use Adlerian therapy within the school system to best meet the needs of the children whom they serve. I recognize that many of you may not work with families and have specific attention given to children, but this is just to lay the foundation and also communicate the genesis of where family therapy began. And from understanding the genesis of family systems therapy, we will evolve into understanding how family therapy or family systems therapy can be used with adults and couples and other individuals. I hope you found this lecture helpful, and I look forward to sharing additional information with you about family therapy.